Greetings, everyone. Greetings from the East Coast of the United States. Welcome to the Community Building Town Hall. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm going to be your host for this really extraordinary session for the next hour. Welcome to everybody. But before we begin our conversation, let me begin with some introductions. First of all, I'd like to introduce some of the folks who are involved. And that's going to be a couple of our guests. Karen Costa is an online teaching and learning specialist. She writes for women in higher education, and she has an awful lot to bring to the discussion about how we interact, socialize, and build community online. I'd also like to welcome Ernie Perez over at Boston University. He's the Director of Educational Technology there. And he also has an awful lot to bring to bear on our conversation. He also just moved to Boston from Southern California. So if you'd like to make weather jokes to him, I'm sure he's ready for all of them. Now, also on deck, we should have available the head of client success at Yellowdig, Brian Verdeen, who has been with us for our entire program. And I'm really looking forward to what he has to say. And in the meantime, if you'd like to be able to learn more about me, I'm your moderator and host. BrianAlexander.org will tell you more. If you'd like to learn more about our sponsor, you can check out their blog or their YouTube channel. And if you want to learn more about how Yellowdig works, you can see there's a whole webinar just for them this noon Eastern Time on Thursday. So, to begin, this is a time where it's extraordinarily difficult to be a person in society right now. We live under the enormous shadow of the pandemic. We have growing pressure to being online, including abuse and trolls. And the real question is, how can we make a community out of this? How can we improve our community building? And how can we grow our communities in ways that are humane and productive? To start off this conversation, I'd like to begin by bringing Karen Costa on stage. And Karen, where do we find you?
I'm on stage. I've never been in Shindig before, so.
Well, welcome.
I'm a little excited to be on stage.
Oh, very good. Well, where are you today, Karen?
I am in Gardner, Massachusetts. I'm about an hour west of Ernie, hour west of Boston, kind of in the middle of nowhere in Massachusetts, which isn't the worst thing right now.
No. You could be further west. You could be in the Berkshires.
Well, I did my graduate studies at UMass Amherst, so we're familiar with Western Mass, and
you know all about that.
Good stuff.
Well, I'm really glad you're here, and as a book person, I really appreciate seeing your bookshelves.
Well, those are my babies back there.
Yes. Those are your own material.
Those are some of my best friends.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, to get people to know you a bit more, Karen, let me ask. Looking ahead for the rest of 2020, what are you going to be spending most of your time working on and thinking about?
Well, I think one of the reasons that I was asked to be here today is that I do a lot of work with online communities. So I am focused right now on supporting faculty success. I have a belief that faculty success is worthy in its own right. And we also know it's critical to student success and institutional success. Well, I'm not sure we all know that, but that's what I believe. So I'm doing what I can to support faculty in this transition, helping them create quality online learning experiences, not only for our students and the success of our institutions, but for their own sense of creating meaning and finding purpose in this world. And that has been what I've been doing for the past, 15 years or so. There's a growing interest in that work, I think, in the past couple months, which is interesting. But I'm staying very active these days, and that will continue to be my focus.
Oh, I bet. If you're helping faculty get online and do it well, you're going to be really active as you want to be.
Well, better than the alternative. I tried taking some time off, and the thoughts start going. So I'm happy to have some healthy work distractions right now and be able to serve others. That seems to help my wellness in moderation, of course. So I'm really excited that that you reached out to talk about online communities. I think there's a lot of potential here. We saw an immediate interest in putting coursework online, which, remote emergency instruction. What I've seen in the past couple of weeks, which has been kind of wild, is that in the span of like 2 weeks, everyone was asking me, and I was seeing tweets and posts about this concept of online communities. There was this shift between how do we get content online and how do we connect with students online, and learning management systems, into now this interest in how do we connect people and build true virtual communities. And many of us have been doing that for years. So I'm excited to see that there's an interest in that.
That's an important shift to note, because we did seem to start off with a kind of product oriented. How do I get my lectures online?
Yeah.
How do I get but now it's how do we actually build human interaction? Well, let me ask you to hold that thought for a second. I want to bring the second member of our esteemed panel up on stage, and this is Ernie Perez from Boston University. Hello, Ernie.
Howdy.
Hi, Ernie.
How are you? I'm very excited to be here today again. This is also my first time on Shindig, so it's great to be on stage.
Well, I was going to actually ask to introduce you, Ernie, a bit, but let me just use that moment to introduce the platform to see how it works for those of you who are new to it or haven't used it for a while. This works pretty much like a video conferencing tool, except it has a few different spins to it. One of them is the stage function. This is where the three of us are now. And it's called the stage because everybody can see and hear everything that goes on stage. I mean, you can see Karen's awesome bookshelves. You can see the cool painting behind Ernie. You can see my bookshelves hopefully not falling over on top of me. But that's for everybody to see. Now, below us, you should see around you between 15 and 20, depending on where you are, other people from around the world. So some of them might be a video feed like Bob from Yellowdig. Some of them might be a static photo like Anna from Becker College. But each of them represents one or more people signing in from somewhere in the world. Now, if you want to talk to one of those people, one thing you could do is just double click on them. And if they feel like talking to you and their camera and mic are on, your two icons can click together like Legos, and you'll have your own private audiovisual bubble. Think of it like being in a lecture hall and leaning over to whisper to somebody. But this is really about conversation. This is not about presentation. The handful of slides I showed at the beginning, that's it for now. This is all about conversation. And you can converse with us in two major ways. Look at the bottom of the screen. You should see a white strip running along at the very center of the bottom. And there are a few different options there. One of them will have a number. Right now it says 40. If you click that, up will pop a chat box. And that chat, almost everybody gets to see what you type. And we find people like to use that for informal conversation. When I was teasing Bernie and forgot to tease Karen about weather in New England, people often make jokes about the temperature, that kind of thing. But also it's a good place to share resources and URLs that come up. But beyond that, back on that white strip, you'll see two buttons. One's a raised hand, and one's a question mark. If you press the raised hand, that tells us you want to join us on stage. So if your microphone is on, your camera is on, and you're in a place where you can talk out loud, great, press that button. When the time is right, I'll press another button and you'll be up on stage. And you can talk face to face with all of us. It's that easy. Now, if you don't have a microphone and camera that work, or if you aren't in a place where you could talk out loud, that's fine. Go back to that question mark button. If you press that, up will pop a little box into which you can type a comment or a question. When the time is right, I'll flash that on the screen for everyone to see, and I'll read it out loud for everyone to hear. And I find people often start that way, especially if they're nervous about being on camera. You shouldn't be nervous. Keep in mind that nobody here has as much hair as I do. Now, so that's it for how Shindig works. It's a very, very smooth technology. Now that I've introduced the technology, Ernie, let me ask you, like I asked Karen, to introduce yourself by thinking about the next year. What lies ahead for you? What are you going to be spending most of your time thinking about and working on?
Sure. So a couple of the projects that we're working on, we're launching a new online MBA this fall, which has been very hyped in the media. It's the partnership with edX, all in $24,000, $25,000 tuition costs. So that's pretty exciting, fully online, developed for an online platform. So that's very exciting. And interestingly enough, it ties in with what we're doing now, right? So we are trying to figure out how we are all going to move into this new era, this new normal, and how we will be able to provide the education that we provided for many years in this new world. So it's how we will deliver fall. We've seen what the CSU, which I recently moved from. I was at CSU Northridge.
Oh, sure.
I was at CSUN I was there for 7 years, so I am well acquainted with those folks and what they're working on. To the other side, we saw what Notre Dame said last night and how they're planning on doing their semester. So I think you can look across the river here, you see Harvard, and they've announced that they're doing something different for their med school for their first year. So I think it's all about how we will proceed with this new normal and making sure that it's a success, whatever we choose, and whatever curveballs we get throughout the semester, with this pandemic or anything that happens, that we're prepared to have actionable results and make sure that our students and our faculty are well taken care of.
Well, that's well said. That's well said. Both of you have a really strong ethos of service, which I really admire. Both of you, Karen and Ernie. Friends, I have all kinds of questions with which to pepper our guests today. But keep in mind that this is a community forum. This is a town hall where the idea is for you to be able to share your thoughts and your questions. So as we go along, please feel free to either click the raised hand to join us on stage, which is really, really easy. I promise I won't even make Star Trek sound effects as we do it. Or just type in the question mark and type in a question or a comment. The first question I wanted to ask you is, thinking about what the fall could be like. What are the best ways we have for creating learning communities online? What are the best? I guess when I'm asking that, I'm thinking both in the kind of grand strategy way, like how do we organize an entire program like your new MBA, down to the small level of how we do this within a given online classroom. I mean, what are some of the ways we can make the best community?
Well, I have a few thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts about fall. It's wild to see everything that's coming out, and certainly nothing. There seems to be only uncertainty, but I do think we can rely. The first thing that comes to mind is that I do think we can rely on folks who've already been doing this work, and I think that as we get curious about how we can build and grow online communities in the fall, I have a hunch that there's somebody at your institution who's already been doing that work. Very likely, that person is faculty. I think, I just really want to emphasize the importance of having faculty at the table when we're making decisions about fall and planning for fall. Yeah. Emphasize the importance of talking about classroom communities and co-curricular communities and faculty professional development communities as we plan for fall. Have faculty and students at the table. I don't know if that's always the case right now, and I just think that is so critical. We've got experts in this, so let's lean on them and draw from their expertise.
How can we do that with students during the summer when summer enrollment is so low?
I think students are eager to help. I think students are looking for connections. We can have a shindig with students, or we can Zoom with students, or something I've been bringing back is the good old-fashioned telephone call. We can talk to people on the phone. I had a graduate student reach out to me recently from, I forget which institution, but she and her classmates are working on a project to create a policy at their school to encourage faculty to not force students to be on camera in Zoom. And that's something I'm pretty passionate about, so they found me. But this was a student-led initiative. I'm hearing about students creating food banks on campus. Our students are proactive, energetic, and ready to be part of this conversation.
Well, that's great to hear. Thank you. Thank you. Ernie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we started thinking about how we're going to bring these co-curricular activities and not only to the continuing students, but what about our freshmen and transfer students, right? So they would normally come to campus in June for the weekend and learn all about our values and the way that we do things. They would learn the campus. They would meet their new classmates. They would probably meet their roommates, find those affinity groups that they're part of, and build that community that they would do in person. Well, what are we going to do now that the students can't come onto campus because campus is still closed? Maybe they can't travel. So how do we build that community and make sure that that we don't lose students, right? So that's a big thing today, right? That we don't have summer melt, and that we're helping those students. And so we're building that in. And one of those aspects is, as you mentioned, there are others on campus that are already working on these kinds of things, on building community and engaging them. So as it happens, that Yellowdig was something that we had been looking at for our online MBA to build community, something that you would normally do within an MBA program on campus. And we started thinking, can we use that for our incoming freshmen and transfers to build that community over the summer, and that they have something to build on for the rest of the school year, right? So we've started building courses that we're enrolling new freshmen and transfer students into, so they can learn our learning management system that they will end up using in the fall and spring, and start building those communities within that. So we'll be rolling that out so these new students can do that. So it's not only the continuing students, et cetera, but now how do we engage everyone, right, including our incoming students that have not had the chance to meet those folks on campus. I think that that's one of the differences that we're when you build an online program, you kind of think about that from the get-go. We didn't have to think about that in the spring because folks had already met each other, right? It was just an emergency, like have to go on Zoom. But now we have to build these communities from the get-go, and that's something that we're thinking about.
So building communities using an LMS, focusing on students, focusing on especially on transfer and early enrollment students. This is great stuff. But as usual, before I could say anything, we have a great question coming up here from down the street from you. Actually, this is from Aditi at the Harvard Kennedy School, and she asks this. Let me flash it on the screen. Hello, how can we, if at all, create spaces for serendipitous, informal conversations for students and faculty to interact with each other? So serendipitous and informal conversations, as opposed to structured and formal ones.
I will, I'm very grateful to Yellowdig for having us here. I'm new to Yellowdig. I have a lot to learn about it, and I'm excited about it. I have been using Mighty Networks for a couple of my virtual communities, and it allows for those sort of serendipitous connections. I actually see some of my, one of the communities I'm a part of is called Gather. It is about 250 women working in higher education. We are a beyond institutional collaborative space, so we gather together without anyone's permission to connect and support with one another. And I see a lot of Gather faces here. We are able through that space to have these, there's an app, so I can get messages. I have connected with Gather folks both in the network and also on social media, and then that leads to lots of connections through that space. So I think some of these platforms like Yellowdig and Mighty Networks and others, Slack is coming to mind as well, do allow for those, just-in-time informal connections rather than, in addition to perhaps more formalized events like the one we're in now.
Well, that's great to know. And what was the group called? Gathered? The group of yours, Karen, that had friends of yours in it.
I made the card. I muted myself, and then I was frantically trying to unmute myself.
You're fine.
That's happened to everybody, right?
Yeah,
the group is called Gather.
Gather.
Yeah, and we started in January. We have about 250 women working in higher ed now. Yeah,
that's awesome. Well, thank you, and don't worry about the mute. That's okay.
I'm not. I appreciate those moments because they show other people, that we're all human.
Yes.
The humanity aspect of it. So I think that for informal, I see that our students are very active on Reddit, and they chat back and forth with each other. That's if you want to take it outside the institution. I think that students are already doing that. So I think we should have something that we can offer our students to make it more academic if needed. So I think that whether it's Slack or Teams or Pronto, or whatever there is, that there can be engagement tools that we can provide students, that we can help them to have that that ability to connect. I think that that's really kind of on us to help them do that.
Well, these are great answers, and Aditi, thank you for the really, really good question. If I could take the question a little bit further, though, and ask, what are some of the ways that we can reproduce the campus life functions? I don't mean necessarily just for residential life in terms of residence halls and Greek life and so on, but also some of the other functions, be they scholarly societies set apart from majors in a particular field, clubs, of course, student athletics. I mean, should we try to reproduce those online and have, the Glee Club meet using Shindig? Should we set up other groups? Should we do that with the LMS, or let students organize in Reddit, or what would you think?
Yeah. So I'll start. We've already started having some conversation with the dean of students that it's our classrooms that we're thinking about having them Zoom enabled, so that groups after hours can go into those spaces and bring other folks in, right? So we already license Zoom for all our students, staff, and faculty. So of course, we would love to help our students with their organizations to bring those folks in, right? So make sure that that connection is still happening. I think that as we move forward with the new normal, we will all have to think about ways that we can bring more people in, right? So we're going to be remote. We know that there's some folks that are international students that will not be able to make it onto campus, right? For whether it's travel restrictions or visa issues, that the embassies aren't open. So I think that it will be on all of us, from the academic side to student services, res life, co-curricular, et cetera, to make sure that we're kind of lassoing in everyone to make sure everyone's included.
Good point. Thank you.
And I think I would add, I was thinking this morning about virtual communities, and a book that I was reading recently came to mind, and the author included in her book, her name's Kay Lee Hogan, she included in her book letters and responses from women. It was a feminist manifesto of some sort that I was reading, of course. And she included letters from the community in her book. And I was thinking about how, the book was written decades ago. We didn't have any of these wonderful tools like Shindig at that time. And this author was still able to build this really robust community experience. I have led student groups and clubs online without ever, being in the same physical space as my students. I was doing that 10 years ago in like a really low key homegrown LMS system. We now have, when I think about what we have when I started in online learning and what we have now, like this is is amazing that we can do this. I think some of us take that for granted. So absolutely, there are already many, many, many institutions running student groups and clubs online very successfully. I'm a part of. I said to my husband the other night, I said, my best friends are people I've never laid eyes on, that I've never been in the same physical space before. Those are people I've met on Twitter, and really, we've just really especially connected during this time. We can do this work online, and we can do it really well, and we can build strong communities without being in the same physical space.
Here. This, you remind me of campus radio. Where you build an invisible community, and people did that for decades. We have, these are great answers, and again, Aditi, thank you for the question. We have more questions just coming in like mad. So let me bring up one from the awesome Joyce Ogburn, who asks, "Is there a link to digital literacy here?" That's a good question. And if you, Karen or Ernie or Joyce, if you want us to dive into what digital literacy is, just let us know.
So, I mean, I think I can start there. I think that there can be a link to digital literacy. I think that for example, with our whether it's our freshman transfer students, we're going to have some modules to help our students learn the technologies that we're using, right? That we can't assume that everyone's going to know how to use the technologies. And same thing for our online MBA students, that there needs to be a base level to set to make sure that everyone is able to use the technologies that we're putting out there, whether it's or LMS or Zoom or Shindig, just like you did today. Introducing the platform to people, that we can't just assume that they're going to know how to use all the things. So I think it's building that in, whether it's implicit or explicit, that we're just building it in to make sure that we have a solid base of knowledge on that.
And that's a great question. It was from Joyce, yes?
Yes.
And the first thing that I think, Joyce, I don't know this for a fact, but I assume you were questioning digital literacy for students. What came to mind, I agree with everything Ernie said, and I think that's important. What came to mind for me is the digital literacy of our higher ed leaders. And that's been something I've had my eye on in the past few weeks. We have folks who are making really intense, important decisions about online learning who have never taken or taught an online course. And yeah. I find that really interesting. And I think that was, an issue. It was an issue before. I think this crisis has highlighted that. Yeah. I think we need to really take that seriously at our institutions. And we need, if our leaders don't have that experience and expertise, then we need to get people at the table who do have some digital literacy to make these decisions.
Agreed. Online teaching is a bit like the Matrix at times, right? You can't be told about it, you have to experience it. But Joyce had a follow-up comment that takes this in a slightly additional direction. She says to add to this, critical thinking and media literacy. So just to take a step back, often digital literacy comes from a heritage going back to the 60s and 70s of media literacy, as well as the 90s of information literacy. So would you two like to speak to that as well?
Sure. I think that part as I'm thinking about media literacy and critical thinking, I think that BU did a great job some years ago at redesigning what we call the hub courses and introducing media literacy, and we purchased Adobe Creative Cloud for Campus. Mm-hmm. Right, so they built in assignments within those programs to ensure that they're learning those technologies that are happening. So now the question is, so we've had some checkout laptops, some checkout cameras, checkout microphones to be able to complete this. The question is, now that we're moving into the fall semester, into maybe some sort of hybrid scenario, how do we do that and ensure that students are still able to have access to those technologies? How do we check those out, right? So are we going to have them scrubbed down? Do we, there are going to be some throwaway items like, the sock on a microphone, can that be reused? Can it not be reused? Right, so there's a lot of questions around that, but I think that if you thinking about maybe what I was reading in the news, that some institutions at the CSU, for example, they were turning on the Wi-Fi in their parking lots so that students could go to campus to log in because they didn't have internet at home, right? So that's technical requirements that we need to think about as we think about the folks that are making decisions on how we're going to conduct business into the fall semester and ongoing. Is it making sure that we're thinking about the students and the technology requirements that are there, mm-hmm. and making sure that we're able to support them in these changes.
Thank you. The hub program sounds great. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I'm so glad that we have folks who are thinking through those technical questions. I don't want to discount that at all. I think for me, when I'm thinking about digital literacy and what I was alluding to before with our leaders, is things are coming up around this, again, this question of do we force and require students to be on camera in a synchronous session?
Right.
How much do we rely on synchronous sessions? So my argument has been synchronous is meant to be the ketchup or the condiment, and asynchronous and online learning is meant to be the burger or the veggie burger for those who are interested. And we've seen this kind of an over-reliance on synchronous methods. I think due to a lack of understanding about the potential, and Christina in the chat is alluding to all of the affordances of virtual communities and online learning. So those are the kind of digital literacies I've been thinking about, how to connect with people through the screen. We have to be a little bit more intentional about that. One of the examples I give, I used to have this white sheet thing I bought behind me because I thought that was more professional. And then first of all, it was very unwieldy and I couldn't get it back and out of the thing. And it was like one of those tents that you have to like fold up and then it pops out, and I could never fold it back up. And now you see some personality and life and humanity behind me, right? And we were able to connect through a shared love of books. And I know there are other people in this space who love books. Those are the kind of digital literacies that I'm interested in, this idea of humanizing the online learning environment and all of the affordances of online learning. I think for me, the technical piece is important and we absolutely need to pay attention to that, but I'm also interested in that human element and the connections that we can build.
Humanizing this. These are rich answers. And again, thank you, Joyce, for the terrific question. If you're new to this technology or this environment or this series, it's that easy to ask questions via the text chat. And we have more that are piling in too. So we're just talking about students. Now we have a question about faculty. And this comes from Vika Zafrin from Boston University, not too far away. Thank you all so much. How do you think about faculty subgroups when it comes to building online communities? We have more than 4,000 faculty with different needs. How to maximize both involvement and usefulness? Good question.
I'm in. So a lot of the work I do is with faculty online professional development communities through Faculty Guild and also through the Online Learning Consortium. And that's a great question. So you've got this really big group of faculty, and how do we connect people? I'm sure that Yellowdig has considered this. I'll speak to my experience in Mighty Networks. We're able to connect people based on, affinity groups. So we can have faculty, for example, one approach would be to divide them by discipline. We can also look at social interests. So we want to certainly, the social piece, I really want to emphasize this. It's not like an extra or a bonus. It is integral to the teaching and learning experience in these professional learning communities. So connecting people through social groups, interests, all sorts of social interests should be included in how we organize people. I also want to say, though, that it's really important. What I have found is that it's really important for people to be able to have cross-disciplinary interactions. That those are the most rich. That in my experience working with faculty, when you're able to say, I had no idea I was ever going to be able to connect with somebody who taught that. I thought I could only connect with people who teach English. And you see people recognizing that common language of pedagogy and humanizing connections. That's where I think those learning communities come to life. So I would encourage you to be creative about that and make sure you're not putting people in boxes that are only going to have them, doing the same old thing. When we help people to reimagine how they can organize themselves, I think that's where we get some of the most creative energy.
How do you do that? The cross-disciplinary. The reason I'm asking, we just had in Australia, Australian universities are just having this huge struggle about layoffs and cuts. And a big group of faculty said, we want to make sure that we don't have interdisciplinary work because we think that's designed to sap departments. Then in the US, we're hearing a lot of faculty who say, they want to kind of hunker into their discipline because that's, their core thing, their critical path. So what are some of the, I guess not just some of the ways, but also some of the structures you've got for getting people to talk between English and biology and anthropology?
Well, the platforms that we have can help us create those structures. So we can organize, if for example, in an online community space, we have an area for faculty who want to create videos in their classes and, active learning conversations and formative assessments. If we put pedagogy first, I think that is one of the ways that we can connect people across disciplines, because whether I'm a nursing instructor or an English professor or math or auto technology, whatever the case may be, we all want to be bringing in these, formative assessment and active learning practices and engagement into our classrooms. So I think lean on the pedagogy and let that lead. I also think it can be a both and let people, of course, people need to rely on on their communities. I don't think we should take that away from them. I think this is in addition to that.
Well, that sounds like a great bridge. It'd be wonderful if we had a university group devoted to education and technology, say, like, hey, one in Boston University, what's it called? Ernie's group. Ernie, would you add to that?
As we've been building our plans for the summer, as Vika said, we have 4,000 or so faculty, right? So that's a huge number of faculty, and we have to figure out ways to connect. And so I think that is what we're thinking. We're thinking about learning communities and affinity groups for those that want to know more about video, more that want to know about flipping their classroom, folks that want to learn about building community, folks that want to learn, about all these things, right? So we're going to have to lay all the different communities out and have a self-selection process to be able to do that. And I think that we had already been doing that with an AR/VR group and things like that. But I think now we're going to have to be very intentional about the learning communities that we have, so that we have the right people and the right ones, or they can jump in and out of them, because we have 3 months to really get faculty in a good spot to be able to offer, that world-class education that we want to offer into this new modality.
I love this. Education and technology is a ground for such groups. You mentioned informal stuff. My cats will definitely always want to be on camera. It's a key thing here. They have to be respected in that. Friends, we have more questions coming in, and we have our first video question. So I'd like to bring Barbara Hall up on stage, and she's at North Central University. Hello, Barbara.
Hello, and thank you. I was very
Barbara.
Pleased. Hi, Karen. I was very pleased to see your cat. Big fan of pets on camera. So I work at an online university, and so we have a virtual commons space where students, faculty, and staff can engage. And I think that it's very important, as we talk about how to create these spaces, that we recognize that they have to develop organically more than fixed. I think that while there's an opportunity to start with some structure, you have to start with something, that it's important that the structure and the communities and the subgroups can develop organically. And so I'm wondering at your institutions or in your thinking, especially around those 4,000 faculty, for example, how are you assessing their needs and their desires to initiate that initial structure that can then grow from there?
Good question.
Yeah, so great question. So I'll point to something that we did for the spring semester. We knew that it was going to be a heavy lift to move to remote teaching or emergency remote teaching, however you want to put it. So we put some very deliberate people in place. So we created something called remote teaching coordinators, and the provost asked each dean of our 17 colleges and schools to designate folks into this remote teaching coordinator role, both academic and technical. And so through them, we're meeting 3 times a week. We're getting feedback on what it is that those colleges and departments and discipline-specific needs are, and we're building things around that. So we're using folks from each college and school to really think about what it is that that we need to offer, both in the learning communities and on the training aspects.
So I appreciate that. But what I heard you say was academic and technical. What about those serendipitous informal spaces, those communities to connect over things that aren't necessarily academic, that can become valuable conversations to the academic conversation, but those informal spaces where people sitting around in the student center connect over a favorite movie or book or something?
Yeah, so I think that we're still building those because we obviously know that that's going to be important because the cooler talk is no longer happening, right? And so we need to make sure that we continue that forward. But that's a great question, and I think we're all trying to figure that out.
First of all, it's really good to see you again. Barbara and I are Gather friends, so we've already connected through a virtual community previous to this. And I have to say that, seeing her again, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to reconnect, and it reminds me of the power of these communities. I think your question is really important. I'm thinking right now what not to do. So what not to do is to create a really rigid, top-down, heavy, administrative presence community for faculty and students. I think we can have structure and offer people guidance and support. But I think we also, need to allow people to engage with one another without feeling like they're being supervised. And that's a light touch, I think anyone who's taught an online course, we want to be present in the online classroom, and we also know we need to have space for students to create and to take things in new directions and to share without us always having to, I don't always need to add my 2 cents, right? In the online classroom. So again, I would say people who've been teaching online know how to have this balance and how to be present and how to give people structure, but also how to allow space for communities to organically build. And I think with faculty learning communities, student learning communities, co-curricular, whatever the case may be, we need to have a champion. We need to have somebody who's there and who's present and who's facilitating. And that person needs to know how to pull back.
That sounds like good pedagogy, actually. Barbara, thank you so much for the great question. Thank you very much. If you're new to Shindig, this is how we do the video chat. You can see it's really easy. Barbara just pressed a button to raise her hand, and I just flung her up on stage. So I guess it's like Gather Cabal, which just gets larger and larger. It's fantastic. We have more questions coming in, and I want to bring up a few more of these. We had one from a course angle, and this is very interesting. And this is from Jody Green. He says, could you speak a little about designing courses that foster student community? It seems as though relationships in remote or online formats need to be more horizontal than in in-person classes. Oh, it's a great question, Jody.
Already checked out the work of Michelle Pacansky-Brock. She is one of the leaders in the online learning field around this idea of this movement of humanizing online learning. I think you will absolutely vibe with her work, and she speaks to that horizontal nature of building communities in online courses. A few ways off the top of my head that I build community: I am present in the class. I step into my role as a leader in the classroom environment and as an expert. And I also really try to run a non-hierarchical class where students are treated as my fellow human beings. And we are human beings here together first, learning with one another, rather than that top-down approach. I use things like videos, humor, storytelling to engage my students and to build classroom community.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Ernie, you were going to add to that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think to start off in the leveling the playing field, video introductions and making sure that as the faculty member, maybe that first engagement with the students is that here's my video, why don't you also create one and introduce yourself, kind of to set that level playing field, make sure that everyone's knows you, kind of aware. Maybe you don't want to show your video, maybe it's an avatar, etc. But making sure that everyone is heard. I think one of the things there that I also want to think about is kind of universal design, and thinking through that in multiple ways of allowing that to happen. So maybe it's not a video because the student's not comfortable with that, but maybe it's a narrative. So I think it's also thinking through how you design those assignments and allowing for the communities to build, to also think about universal design.
This is a whole series of very practical tips and strategies, everything from UDL to video intros to knowing when to step back. And then that crazy radical idea of treating students as human beings, just wow. Amazing how that can work. Friends, we have about 14 minutes before the end of the hour. So I want to make sure that you all get a chance to share your thoughts and questions. And even as I say that, we have someone who's just from down the road from me. Tim Marquis at VCU has a question. Let me bring this up on stage. Karen loved the hamburger image. What's your follow-up to faculty who would insist learning community will be lost if there is no face-to-face classroom teaching this fall?
Thank you, Tim, for your great question. I get asked some version of this question quite a bit. What about the folks who feel this way? So as I said before, I think one of the best ways to help people understand how to teach online and to build online communities is to allow them to be part of an excellent online course or online community. And I think I think maybe we're realizing we've fallen a bit short there, and that higher ed could have done a bit more into bringing faculty and leaders into powerful online learning communities, and to giving them a chance to be a student in an online course. I wish we'd been a little bit more proactive about that, because that was how I learned. I learned to teach from amazing online professors. My second thought on that. So let me finish that. I think we need to get faculty into faculty learning communities online. I think that needs to happen. I think we need experts to facilitate them, and then they will be better prepared to facilitate those with students. To ask somebody who's never been a part of a strong, robust online community to then facilitate one, to me, is a bridge too far. So I think we need to get them into those and do so mindfully and with their input. And the other thing I'll add is that I have limited time and energy, so I'm mindful of how much I invest in folks who are themselves invested in not not engaging with this work. So I have those conversations, and then I move forward. So I would say work on faculty learning communities, and then keep doing your good work.
Well, that's a great answer. This is becoming a seminar on how to design not just classes, but also the entire academic community for the fall. We have some more questions that popped in, including a comment. So I'm going to flash this up on stage before we go further. This is from Jennifer, a great tip. The instructor needs to address each student, saying, "Hello, I see you," and encourage the students to do that as well. Yeah, absolutely. I've heard this referred to as hailing, like two ships, hailing each other. Yeah, that's just a great, practical, easy to do thing. Thank you, Jennifer. And friends, if you want to join us on stage, again, just click the raised hand button, and it lets us know when to beam you up. We have a question from a Yellowdig professional, and this is a great question that we haven't touched on yet. What do you think about HyFlex? Is this a viable model for schools with a runway left before fall? And how would that impact student and faculty communities? And do you want us to talk about HyFlex and how it works, or would you two like to do that?
You want me to start it off? I can.
Sure.
I think the concept with HyFlex is that there would be a residential part of the education, and synchronously there can be a remote version of the class happening through whatever technology. Most of the time, I think there would be the student would get to choose which version they would be either attending in person and doing the learning around that, or there would be that online piece of the class that they could take. I think for many of us that are looking at this HyFlex in higher ed for fall, we're thinking that that option is going to be because the student can't come to campus, or because they're quarantined and they can't come to class. I think in addition to that, many of us are trying to think of density and what we're calling de-densifying the classroom, because a classroom of 40 may only be able to hold 10 with social distancing standards, right? So that concept of the student gets to choose, it may be that choice may be a little bit different. But that is definitely something that we are looking at. In order to do that, there are many things that have to follow in order to make it happen in a good way. All rooms have to have the technology to able to broadcast or record the lecture. Does it need a moderator if there's no TA? How will the faculty member know what's happening on the other side? I've talked to some other institutions. Some of the Ivy Leagues are looking at putting in hundreds of thousands of dollars in classrooms per classroom to have that conversation. That's not going to be feasible for many institutions in these times of financial stress. So how can you do it in a low tech model? Do you have a moderator on in class that's looking at the chat? That is raising their hand, right? Like Susie Q in Albuquerque is asking us this question. The other thing to think about in our global society is that we have students from all over the world. So synchronous may not work for folks in Asia or in Africa because of time zone differences. So there are a lot of things that we have to think about with it. So is it possible? Yes. But we have to think about it now for the technology folks to make sure that it's there. We have to think about it now to think about the implications for students. And we have to think about it now to talk to the faculty and help the faculty think through assessment, right? So you can't use that Scantron that you used to use in Econ 101 to do tests, right? So now we have to think about how are the different ways that we're going to look at that. And, this all being very intentional in what we're looking at learning objectives and kind of going around that. So it's maybe it's a creation of online content light. We won't be able to completely redo programs and courses to a fully online, but really need to think about all those different aspects of it.
Oh, that's really, really well said, Ernie. Thank you. Karen, did you want to jump on that, or?
I have some thoughts on HyFlex. So I have never taught a HyFlex class. Most of us haven't. Very few have. It appears to me to be complex. We have limited time and resources. We are all under immense stress, and we have a model that I think we know works, which is the primarily asynchronous online model, which I think works really well. So I think if HyFlex works for your institution, and every institution is going to be different, and you have the resources in place to do this, and that is the best decision for you, then absolutely pursue that. I think sometimes it seems like people are choosing HyFlex to avoid online learning, and I don't know if that's going to lead to their intended goals. With limited time and resources, I would invest in supporting faculty, and I would invest in instructional designers and faculty developers to create amazing online courses like the many that already exist, and to connect those to virtual communities. That's how I would, if I'm queen for a day, that's how I would focus my limited time and resources.
Oh, that's well said. I've taught HyFlex, and I'm happy to talk about it, but not right now. And I've also we're going to have the HyFlex Inventor on the Future Transform next month. So
I think folks would love to hear more from you on that, and to hear from that person. Yeah.
I'll just say very, very briefly, I taught seminars this way, and for me, the best analogy is it felt kind of like having bifocals, that I would switch between near and far. And the trick was to have that mental attitude that you described, Karen, and that Jennifer Kramer mentioned, making sure to hail everybody. So I had to always make sure at first to include the distant people at all times. And that involved having my laptop open so I could have a chat box open so they could chat as well as speak. And I had to make a point of, just like when you just don't call on anybody. You try to shape a class that way. You try to call on the people who seem to be underrepresented or are really interesting. There are all kinds of criteria. So you just add that criteria into the mix. We want to make sure we have that student from San Francisco or from Boston involved. There is some technological stuff we could talk about. Ernie, I don't think $100,000 is necessary, but you do need to have a setup for clearly visually displaying the remote students, as well as, especially, this doesn't get enough attention, having sound work, having the right mics, and that's really, really key. There's some robotics that play a role in it. There's a tool called the QB, for example, which is basically a kind of iPad on a swivel that the remote person can turn from side to side, and there are telepresence robots which let people move around. But I'm happy to talk more about this, but I'm conscious of time, and we had another key question and an observation. So first, let me just share this observation from my namesake at Yellowdig. Brian Verdeen says, I feel a lot of these casual conversations need to happen alongside the serious stuff, in the same places where the valuable conversations happen. And that's a great point. That's a great point. That's not a technical challenge. That's just a design issue. But the question comes back from Aditi, who has a follow-up, a different point. I've been following Karen's great work on trauma-informed teaching online. Would like to learn more. How can we make students feel safe and cared for in this environment? Great. So you can point us to research.
Come follow me on Twitter. I'm sharing as many resources as I can. There are principles of trauma-informed care in place. They include things like choice, so making sure that we give students choice. An example of that is not forcing anybody to be on camera. I cannot tell you how many people in my work and at home and in my personal life have told me that the thought of being on camera absolutely petrifies them. My 11-year-old son, when he knows he has a classroom session, will say, am I going to have to be on camera? I had a mom reach out to me to say her son was avoiding his classroom sessions because he didn't want to be on camera. So choice is a really important part of trauma-informed practices. We don't want to force things on people. Faculty, the big thing I want to say is that we need to recognize that this is not the responsibility of the counseling team, and most schools do not even have a counseling team. They have a counselor. For thousands of students. This trauma awareness is a pedagogical issue. It impacts both teaching and learning. We all need to be educated about the impacts of trauma on how our brains learn and teach and interact with our colleagues. That was true before. It is even more so now. So seek me out and I'll get you any resources you need. And I'm doing more work on that. And there's been a lot of interest, which is good, but speaks to the times we live in.
Thank you, Karen. And I appreciate your time limitations, and that's very, very generous of you. Yeah. Friends, we are at the end of our hour. We have raced through a whole series of points, and I just going through my notes, thinking everything from trauma, universal design for learning, the use of video, other technologies from Yellowdig to Reddit to the LMS, student groups, digital literacy, faculty groups, the questions of how to structure groups versus allowing them to develop organically, different ways of making community. This has been fantastic. I'm just grateful for everyone's contributions to this very, very important discourse. Can I ask before we go, Karen, Ernie, what's the best way to keep up with you? Karen, do you want to mention your Twitter handle again?
Costa on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
Great.
Yep. And for me, LinkedIn or Twitter, same handle, Ernie Perez, ERNPEREZ.
Oh, that's handy. That's handy. Well, listen, we are completely at the end of time, and I want to respect everybody's schedule and time. So let me just say thank you all. for your great conversation, for your great questions. Thank you to Ernie and to Karen for just having so many good thoughts. It's really been a pleasure to learn from you and to benefit from all of your work. I think the more we pay attention to this, the better we are and the better experience we'll have for our students this fall. Let me thank Yellowdig for sponsoring this. We're really grateful to them for that. And let me just give another shout out to all of our links here. So if you'd like to learn more, you can follow us there. In the meantime, thanks everybody. Work in your communities, stay safe, and take care. Bye-bye.